Well, thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I really enjoyed today's talks, and I'm sure there'll be more interesting talks to come. So here is really a pretty high-level talk on interpretive machine learning works my group has been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. And so I kind of put it under the interpreting deep neural networks towards trustworthiness. So we all live now in the age of AI, and I like this quote from Bill Gates: AI is like nuclear energy, both promising and dangerous. So we want to maximize the promise and minimize the danger. And data science, I see myself as a statistician, machine learner, and data scientist. We really take advantage of both computer science, math and stats, and also domain knowledge, really try to solve problems and generate new knowledge. And the data science lifecycle is really not just one step, which we hear a lot in the different academic workshops. It's not just about modeling, and we really need to take into account the whole data science lifecycle from domain question, data collection, data cleaning, to the whole pipeline. And machine learning has really entered a new phase a couple of years ago, try to seek insights and interpretations. And EU is really leading the way in terms of regulations, try to encourage machine learning developers and also statistician data scientists really try to make our algorithm transparent as much as possible. And there's a new EU law called Digital Service Act that went into effect in November 2022, really requiring now large internet platforms for them to give algorithm transparency and a risk assessment. Of course, this is all law language, that there are a lot of detail to be worked out. What does it mean, transparency? What does it mean by having a risk assessment? And to really ground ourselves in terms of solving problems, right? Actually, it was last IPAM workshop a couple of years ago. A co-founder of a startup was asking me about interpretive machine learning, and she was interested to convince FDA why her deep learning algorithm should be put into clinical use for radiology, right? And I work more in the science fields that we want to understand genetics, biology, development biology, how different genes interact to form the next stage of Drosophila or fruit fly development stage. And also I will show you that we also work with cosmologists, try to figure out some deep learning models, why it works so well for estimating like a very important cosmology parameter. I mean, this is based on simulation data. So the way we start tackling the scientific problem, often we actually start from machine learning off-the-shelf methods like interpretation we came out with. And then we kind of move towards really helping scientists to solve their problems. I see our work, a lot of them fell under the umbrella of scientific machine learning. And people have been using scientific machine learning, and here's my definition of scientific machine learning. So it uses machine learning for scientific research or biomedical research to extract from data discovery, theory, and knowledge, and build scientific principles in machine learning algorithms. And it iterates between the above two steps, and results are subject to scientific standards. So it's a higher bar than just machine learning look at prediction errors. And open source software and reproducible software are very important for other people to replicate your results. A couple of years ago, we worked together with 4 former students. Now they all left the group. Jamie now is a startup founder, and Shannon worked for Microsoft Research, a research professor in neuroscience at UCSF, and Carl is UCSF postdoc. So at the time, Jimmy and Channel working on machine learning interpret methods, pretty much like sentiment analysis, very machine learning. And Risa was working on neuroscience problem with Jay Gallant, and then Carl was working on genomic problems. So we put our mind together because we're all doing interpretations, and we try to say, even within the group, what do we mean by interpret machine learning? So we put our mind together, and the project was really led by Jamie and Chandon. We have this paper, actually is pretty well cited by now, about 1,000 citations. So we try to really say that we should not interpret every model. You want some evidence to see that the model actually captures some reality. So we use predictive accuracy, but it could be other things, could be domain knowledge. So to convince ourselves that this model is worth interpreting, you can apply a model to any data and start interpreting the model. But if you don't know whether the model actually captures any reality, you're basically creating an illusion, and you'll be living in the illusion with your interpretation. So predictive accuracy has to be there, or some other form of reality check. And then you enter the domain of what I think a lot of the talks have tried to address is descriptive accuracy or interpretability. And that's a very vague kind of term without the domain. Context, it's very hard to compare. We all come out with different ways of doing the interpretation, but at the center of all these different interpretation, it's really this concept of ablation or perturbation. We really want to do something, change something, and see how the prediction performance or the accuracy will change, or the science or the insight will change. We add to these two components already there in the literature, emphasize relevancy. Relevancy is really, you need to keep in mind a group of humans you want this interpretation to work. Because interpretation, well, maybe later we're going to become one interpretation related to another machine learning algorithm, but right now it's really all facing the human. So who is the audience you want your interpretation to work? And what's the problem you want your interpretation to be relevant? So these two things I think are very key for us really to make things happen on the ground is the relevancy. And most of us would think that there's a trade-off, but not always, as I will show you, between the predictive accuracy and descriptive accuracy and how much you want the relevancy to control this. Most researchers probably agree that, well, decision trees are pretty interpretable, but not really every decision tree. If a decision have 1 million nodes, I think most of us cannot interpret. Maybe 5, 10. I talked to a ER doctor, a collaborator at UCLA. For him, ER room, there's a time constraint. For him, it's like maybe 10 different decisions, 10 nodes. That's about what they can handle in an ER room. So that you can't, even it's a medical application, depends on the situation, time becomes a factor for ER interpretability instead of more general long-term care. And logistic regression, the same thing. We think it's interpretable, but when you have 1 million parameters, I'm not sure it's interpretable, but maybe 5 terms, you can handle it. And then you have random forest, and then deep learning. Of course, AlexNet was one of the biggest vendors for a while from the old like SIFT type of computer vision. And we saw a performance gain. And you have dense neural networks and later become a convolutional networks. And then a huge advance was made when transformers were made. It's now like 5 years ago. And you see, again, huge performance jump. And even the VITs, the vision, transformer-based visions, you see a performance gain. But for me, the most impressive for deep learning coming from the scientific angle is really AlphaFold 2. AlphaGo was entertaining, was fine, but really impressed me was actually AlphaFold 2, right? This is a really hugely important scientific problem, and they really cracked the protein code. So another line of research in my group, which I won't have time to talk about, we actually try to build down large language models from amino acids and really try to do cardiology, try to find genetic drivers of heart diseases. So this is, for me, a true advancement. But of course, huge amounts of human and computer resources put into it, and biologists were on the team. So coming back to scientific machine learning, I think relevance is the key. And how do we define relevance, right? So relevance is defined as provides insight for a particular scientific audience into a chosen scientific problem. And scientific insights have to correspond to facts about the real world. And interpretation machine learning model need to be vetted by and calibrated against trustworthy or established factual information. So interpretation can be just living in your own mind. We have to really ground it and to have actionable recommendations or hypothesis generation, and then see the effect of that and go through this iteration. And coming back, refine our interpretation method, and then for the next phase of recommendations and see actions in the real world. I mentioned in my title about trustworthiness of interpretable machine learning or deep learning. So where does trust come from, right? Trust comes from if you come up with the insights, coincide with the existing scientific knowledge. And of course, physics has probably the most established reputation for trustworthiness. When you go to epidemiology, you can see that a lot of agent-based model didn't really work so well for us to predict the COVID pandemic. So there's also not the same trustworthiness in terms of the different scientific fields. But what under our control as data scientists or machine learners or statisticians is really the process for us to do the data science-driven work. And that's what we came out with, is a terminology called the vertical data science process. We have to really check every step of the data science lifecycle. So I'll return to this at the end of my talk about the trustworthiness of the interpretation of a model need to be built on the trustworthiness of the process that lead to the model we try to interpret. They're not separable. So for the rest of the talk, I will start basically share with you the journey of my group's work on interpretable machine learning, which started with pretty much machine learning for sentiment analysis. And then I always have this love of science. So I pushed the group to say, let's try to see whether this method actually work for scientific problem. So it's kind of an external validation. It's not exactly an intervention experiment, but it's a downstream evaluation. So if you cannot do hypothesis generation and do experiments, at least you should try to see whether your method is externally validated in the sense that for a different data set, for different application, whether the same method still yield insight. From that problem in cosmology, I worked on deep wavelets like 20 years ago. I always like wavelets as adaptive Fourier transform. Then we really moved to the next generation of interpretable deep learning, in the sense we want to really do data-driven wavelet estimation based on fitted deep learning models. And then we find another external study, which is completely different in another project in my group on cellular biology, and see whether this methodology of adaptive wavelet distillation works, and actually work there too. For both of these cosmology and cellular imaging problem, actually we not just distilled or compressed or the model through adaptive wavelets, we actually improved prediction performance. So since that the original deep learning model didn't have enough regularization, or didn't have enough regulation in the right structure. And therefore, when you have this fitting structure of wavelets for this problem, scientific physical science problem, you gain both. And I'll finish with the case I was trying to make is that you need to really also vet the process to arrive at the model through lots of stability analysis. So this agglomerative contextual decomposition was built on ACD, right? As I said, many of the methods based on some idea perturbation, right? The Lime and the RRP, but few methods really deal with feature importance on the interaction between features. So that's what we set ourselves to do. And there's this different methods, and there's also a contribution based, but under the hood, there's also this concept about something being removed, something being changed, or perturbation, and to come up with some interpretation. And I'm really advocating for plural form of interpretation. I don't believe there's the right form for interpretation for a particular scientific problem. You might say that for general methodology, I really think we should try different methods and know which method works better for what type of structures, and then compare. So what motivated that was saying that you have explanation, positive, but you only give attribute like importance not and good. We want to give a attribute importance to not good. So we want to give a compositional feature importance. And Jamie Murdoch was really the person who did most of the work, was doing some Google intern with Liu, and then got me engaged later after he came back. And Jamie was able to decompose the process of seeing how predictions done and enforce some additivity. And then with some ablation kind of perturbation idea to separate the different contributions and then be able to give different feature importance and also feature interaction importance. So here's example, like you have original input, as I alluded to earlier, and you have the relevant part we care about. We want to give importance on very good, and then we decompose into very good and not, and we just follow the path through and way, in some sense, it's a human judgment call to decompose them into different bits of the information stream, and then we get the context dependence importance, and then the other part irrelevant. So the formula is not that the most intuitive, but it's in the paper. You can take a look. And then later, we generalize to also images. But you can do something quite similar, right? For images, you just take things away from the relevant part, the irrelevant part, and follow the kind of progression of how the prediction is done. But then you have these different pieces of information, right? So you have, for a sentence, it's easier to describe. For each word, you have importance. For every 2 words, you also have importance of interaction and so on and so forth. And they're just different numbers. If you organize them in the integral way, then they're still not integral. Even you call them interpretable because they are feature importances. So the paper when Chandon joined, the project is ACD, is we use the CD scores and use hierarchical clustering, right? So you have 3 letters and you decide which one you join for to find the feature importance. You see which one give you the biggest jump of the importance score, because we already have feature score for any pair and any 3 triplets. So this way it's using CD and uses the hierarchical clustering algorithm to organize them. So now you can see that the blue means positive, the red or orange means not negative. And you can see you can now organize, you can see where the prediction not negative, not very good, it's become sentiment analysis negative. It's because the last bit. In the beginning, very and good are both positive. And then very good become even more positive. But then the last bit, no, not really turn things. Turn this negative prediction. And this is a more complex example where you can see similar things, right? You can really trace where the prediction got flipped back to, in the beginning, kind of positive, and you have a not, and became orange negative, and then the last one, great ensemble cast, also turned this sentence into positive. So this is just give you some inner working interpretation. And similarly for images, right? The images we didn't do step by step. It's too many pixels, and you can see that PUG is important. Even we try to predict PUG, but scale is also important because it's correlation, right? This is not as ridiculous as like a label or something, a ruler next to cancer, but they're correlates. They're not really like causal necessarily, because you can have a PUG without scales. But they just happen to occur together. It's also a choice of the data, right? Probably a lot of images in ImageNet are hockey images, not in a store when the PUG is sorted differently from scales, right? So if I only give you images with PUG putting separately from the scales in a store sells this ski equipment, you actually might not have this correlation. So the input distribution is hugely important. And that's where you can manipulate and come up with more desirable input distribution to help you to do this ambiguation. But that's all kind of human interpretation. We look at it, of course, we are the designer method. We have this confirmation bias. We like what we do. And so now we have to go into the phase of being the worst enemy for your own method. It's kind of red teaming in software engineering. You now have to really try to take it apart. When you can not take apart your method very well, very easily, then you have a good method. So this is moving towards taking it apart by inviting other people to help us to evaluate the method. So we run 2 experiments, admittedly small experiments, about 10 to 13 people. And the first experiment, you can see I have 3 data sets. SST is a Stanford sentiment analysis trunk, and you have the digit, you have the ImageNet. And we have 4 methods the ACD and CD from my group, and IG occlusion are the two leading methods from the two types from other groups. And what we have, the first experiment, is about, we did this kind of, again, perturbation. So what we did is that we randomized the weights of, say, these different deep learning methods that kept the same prediction. So we randomized not too much to flip, but you kind of corrupted the weights. And the interpretation is based on the weights and, of course, and the input. And we hope if it's a good interpretation method, then the interpretation should tell you which one is a more trustworthy model, even if you got the same label, but it's corrupted. So that's the accuracy, whether they chose the good model based on the interpretation. So you can see that our two methods for SST really ahead. And for MNIST, everybody does pretty well. And then for ImageNet, again, the well-organized one also work better because ACD, just the numbers people cannot really interpret. And the second experiment, it means about using the interpretation. Ask people, do you trust the model, right? As often, without the first experiment, the second experiment, it could just be we have a very pretty, interface and people like the story we come up with. But with the first one, because we can actually tell what's a corrupted model and what's not a corrupted model, there's more value in the second experiment. You can also see that. The MNIST is just relatively easy problem, but occlusion didn't work well for MNIST, and the other three methods are pretty comparable. And for the other two data sets, the ACD really came ahead. So this is a little bit try to take things apart to reduce confirmation bias. I always like to see in terms of action, right? We had a very nice discussion this morning saying that we should use the interpretation for something. What we discussed was better, I think, in the sense that we do hypothesis generation in the domain area and we do experiments. But here's something intermediate. That's what when we had a visiting student from Denmark, Laura Regier, mentored by my student and myself. Then at least within the machine learning kind of a scope, we can still see whether this interpretation is useful by saying if we build on something useful in this interpretation, can we make something better? So for example, if your importance measure are really measuring the right importance, and you saw that gender seemed to have a very heavy importance score, if you have an algorithm to reduce the reliance on gender, and you're pushing the algorithm in the right direction, because we don't want, say, hiring practice to rely on gender. Of course, you have other things which implicitly reflect gender, but we're not suppressing that. So this is a work we did. Basically have the ACD as penalty. And every time you train the model, each time you can see how much the gender importance is. We want to make sure that's kind of minimized. And then we can see that we actually can reduce the reliance of the algorithm on gender. So this is kind of, it's not exactly external validation, but it's at least actionable project to show that the interpretation leads to something useful. And that's where I start really leaning heavily on Jamie. By that point already graduated, and we had a postdoc, Woo-Suk joining the group, and Francois Lanusi, the one, and his colleagues, Bohin and Liu, cosmology at Berkeley. So this is funded by the tripod group grants from NSF. So even though we have pretty good performance, have papers published in the machine learning kind of data sets, was not convincing enough for me. So I want to see whether this CD method or ACD method actually can do something for scientists. And Francois Lunes was already working on deep learning. So this is the problem he was working on. He was working on estimating a very important origin of universe parameter called omega m, which is supposed to be a measure of proportion of mass at the beginning of the universe. And then they use physics to have simulated the purple image at this time. And this type of image can be observed with the current telescope technology. So this is simulation. That's why we have truth. So we want to find a method that works really well for the simulation so that we have some trustworthiness when we use it for the really observed data. So, and he already designed the ResNet, which gave the best performance in the simulation setup he was working on, right? So the question is why this cosmology deep learning model works so well. And here relevance comes in. You can go do LIME or do R method or do LRP, all of that to identify pixels to see which one is kind of important. But for physicists or for cosmologists, they care about frequency domain. So that's the relevance. So we have to generalize our method to move to the frequency domain, and which we could do. So it's a Fourier transform, it's invertible. So we just moved the interpretation for each frequency domain because we can deal with interactions, and therefore we can come up with a CD score. So there's a different frequency band and some normalized units, and we got each number out. So you can see that based on our interpretation, around 0.25, that's where the information is most important. And actually the simulations actually also done in the frequency band. And you can see that the higher frequencies are not important. So one action item is actually reduce their simulation accuracy of the resources used for the high frequencies. I need to go back to, we're talking about it, but then I need to follow up to see whether they actually done that. And so actually, right now, I don't know. But that's one possible action plan for the cosmology to reduce. We're talking about it, and Francois was pretty excited about it, but I should check with him whether he had done that. So now, like, we have used CD, and then had 3 different data sets, some external validity, and we had really impact back to reduce, say, reliance of this deep learning network on gender. And we had the external validation into cosmology and show its usefulness. And I always was kind of obsessed with something. I really like wavelets. I just felt like it was one of the most beautiful, useful mathematical entities with elegant theory and also useful engineering practice in all physical sciences. So I've been wanting to do something. I felt like deep learning had to be connected with wavelets, and we tried to do scattering transform, all of that. Nothing really, we really have something we felt we should write a paper about. So, but with the collaboration with the cosmology, I saw another opportunity because they're already in frequency domain, right? So I felt like wavelet domain has to be interpretable. So I talked to Woo-Suk and Chen and said, let's go to the wavelet domain. And they talked to Francois, who actually said that actually in cosmology, people already using wavelets, fixed wavelets, to do this omega m estimation. So we completely aligned, and we said, can we do better than fixed wavelets? Can we use deep learning to get us data-driven wavelets so that we can beat both fixed wavelets and also do better? Well, at the time, actually, we didn't think we can do better with deep learning, at least not do worse, but simplify the deep learning network to make it more transparent. And then the last author here is Upal Yahula, who is the director of the Berkeley Bio Advanced Imaging Center. And Channing was already, and others working with him, with my group, for a different completely cellular imaging problem. And that also provides another external validation for adaptive wavelet method. So distillation, the paper we attribute to was Hinton et al. 2015. They want to have a complex deep learning model, and that was a simpler, like a teacher and a student simpler model. But people generalize this distillation idea to other type of interpretable model, depends on the application context, right? For medical application, actually you want decision trees, as I mentioned earlier. And you can also, people like additivity, but a lot of times additivity actually is meaningful for some problems. And you can also go to additive models. So we want, because of physics, the Fourier transform, and therefore adaptive Fourier transform wavelets, we want to have a data-driven learned wavelet transform we want to improve interpretability and compression and efficiency, and we didn't realize actually also improve the prediction accuracy. That was not in the design, but it turned out to be the case because I think wavelet is a really good structure fit to the two scientific problems we worked on. So this is one slide of wavelet for this IPAM crowd. Maybe it's not too people probably familiar. So the paper was last year's 2021 NERIS paper, and some referee just said, well, wavelets is, you have to make a case why wavelets is interpretable, and it's because I think a lot of the machine learning people are not familiar with wavelets. And in a nutshell, the two great books by Mallet and Mayer on wavelets. So time series, there was some last talk mentioned time series. Then you have this tiling of the frequency and time domain only according to time. So you basically not allow the frequency to vary from time. Like sine function is the best kind of for this time series because you have one frequency. And then you have the Fourier. I'm sorry, it's the best for the Fourier analysis. The second one, you only look at the frequencies. You frequency are the same. So I said something wrong about the first one. The first one is actually you allow the frequency to change, and you're not forcing them the same. Fourier analysis, you may say forcing the Fourier frequencies to be the same. So it's a two tiling of the same time frequency domain. And wavelet is a little smarter. It tiled not as regularly as vertical or horizontal, but it's partition. And you really now you look at this, you're saying that for low frequencies, you only allow change slowly, and for the high frequencies, you allow to change more, but you kind of group them too. You don't want them too many different frequencies. And there's a very nice empirical connection between wavelets and what we talk about deep learning. The first layer of deep learning is like Gabor wavelets, right? And the Gabor is a mathematical entity on the left, and the first layer, AlexNet, looks like Gabor. And you can also have a physiology result from Haber and Wiesel to show empirically that the first the cat, sleepy cat, the V1 area is act like edge and edge detectors, and we have location selectivity and frequency selectivity. So what we decide to do here is how do we estimate the wavelets? So we came out with very machine learning 3 terms in loss function. So we are doing orthogonal Fourier wavelet transform, so it's interpretable. And just like the Fourier transform, you can just do wavelet transform. It's the psi. And then you call the whole thing with the inverse transform, the F. And then we use a pre-trained deep learning and with all the good differentiability, and we form the interpretation loss. So the first loss saying that we want to make sure this wavelet transformation is more or less interpretable. You cannot make it exactly, but you want the reconstruction loss to be close to 0. And the wavelet loss, I'll explain in the next few slides. And so for any given wavelet transform, you basically can calculate this loss function. And the H and G are the low pass and high pass filters, which kind of is the equivalent representation of the wavelets, and you want to optimize over through stochastic gradient descent. And the last term, we actually didn't do our CD. Because it's computation too expensive, we did the sparsity of the derivative or line for the F, including the transform. So how do we force a wavelet out? We look at wavelet books, Pierce taken from Mallet's book, and you have all these equations that these low pass and high filters have to satisfy. Right? Giving a mother wavelet, you can have this program to write down, the H is written there, and you also can write down G, this way of through scaling and translation. So there's a program to do that. And we turn every equation into a penalty. You want this to satisfy equal to 2, I just take the difference and do square. You said, of course, I can do absolute value, but it creates a problem for differentiability, so we do square. We just take all these equations from different books and turn them into difference and L2 penalties. Okay, so it's the same idea. Something equal to 0, we turned it into a penalty 2. And that's the term. You can see just different equations. They're not all independent, but it's okay for us. You put them together, turn equations into penalties. And I already mentioned the last term, interpretability loss. It's basically L1 loss on the partial derivatives of this function, including the fitted deep learning. So back to the cosmology problem, right? As I said, people are already using fixed wavelets to obtain this omega m. And there's something called peak counting method, which I won't describe because we use the same method. So we really embed ourselves in the physics. We didn't develop new methods, which is replace the fixed wavelet in the peak counting method by the data-driven wavelets. So let's look at the table, right? AWD is our method. So it's from ResNet. That was with about 10 million parameters. ResNet 18, Francois and colleagues developed. And we end up with only 1,000 parameters. So it's still a lot, but it's much, much less than 10 million. And AWD give prediction error. This is on test set, basic 1.0. And then if you look at the Laplace, Robert Cross, WC, DB5, this is all known wavelets. And we beat sometimes by 50%, at least 30%. And peak height is another method and doesn't do as well. ResNet, that's 1.15. So we cut down another 10 to 15%. If you don't use the ResNet, that's the last number. You just directly try to find wavelets without the deep learning pre-fitted model, ResNet, you lose. You get 1.3. So it says that deep learning is important to get this 10% gain. So we not just shrink the number of parameters by 10 to the power 4, we also improve the performance by 10 to 15%. But this is very much embedding ourselves in the cosmology community and use their peak counting method. And this is the optimization. This is the wavelets we will be optimizing over. I remember I have 2 penalties, and when you vary them, you get different wavelets. So the one we liked optimized is the one which is pretty symmetric, right? And this is interpretable in the sense that it really says that it's really the difference, because omega m, remember, it's about the mass, the amount of mass in the beginning of the universe. And it's really the difference at the peak where you're moving this filter around. This is orthogonal, so basically go to 2 dimension with this 1 dimension. You move around and find the difference between the peak value, and you kind of suppress a little more than 0, and then that's the one contains the most information about omega m. So I always want external validation for any methodology, right? So I said, let's use this for a different problem. So this is a problem completely unrelated to cosmology, but it's also part of scientific machine learning. This is, we try to understand a very central cellular process called CME, clathrin-mediated endocytosis. So this is the process very important for a cell, right? So the line is really the cell membranes, and it's a very common channel, standard channel for a cell to get cargoes, to get food and other things in. So how does it? Before I didn't know this until this project was really cute, that you kind of this little like a fork, like a key-like things, say they are the cargo you want to bring in. And you have proteins inside to kind of connect them. And you fold this into a little pocket, and you have scissor proteins acting to cut it, and you unpack, and you get the food. So actually, Delta, COVID Delta variant didn't use this process to get into the cell, but Omicron, Delta used something called the cell fusion. It's not the standard way to get things into the cell, but Omicron actually used this process. So it hijacked the normal process to get into the cell. It probably partially explains why it's so contagious. But this process doesn't always finish. you can get things in. If it doesn't unpack, then the food is not accessible. So there's something called molecular or cell partner problem. We want to really understand this basic cell process. We want to track when the process is completed, right? So we can have this orange signal clustering, and we also have an oxalate signal, which is the green. And the green is more indicative whether the process is completed, but it's more expensive. So the machine learning problem is, can we use the cheap orange signal to predict the more expensive green signal, which has more information about whether the whole process is completed? If you use deep learning on the video, it doesn't work. But if we use a lot of understanding into microscopy, and then turn into a time series and track it, then we can make it work. So we basically use a lot of understanding about how the physical process is done to turn into a time series problem. And in the beginning, we didn't have enough data. So we just use a lot of traditional statistical methods and human engagement to have a method. And later we got more data, and LSTM, it worked. In the beginning, LTM just didn't have enough data, didn't really work. Now we can have a deep learning model, and we can also do the same thing as the last cosmology problem and distill the wavelets into something understandable. So for this problem, we're able to shrink the parameter from 1,000, that's the LSTM, has like 1,000 parameter, to about 30. We took 6 largest coefficients at the 5 scale, so 5 times 6, 30. And you see the same kind of phenomenon that here you want a bigger R-squared score, and we end up with 0.26. And if you use LSTM, 0.23, so again, we gain about 10% or 15%. And if you wavelet directly, fixed wavelet, you get about 0.2. And then if you don't use the LSTM, you again get 0.23. You get something quite similar to LSTM. So this is that you actually don't need LSTM here, but we didn't know that. But you can directly get the similar performance, use just adaptive wavelets without the interpretation part, but combine them together, you really have the biggest gain. So this is a problem that we haven't really gone to the far about how can we take advantage of this to do something. So we're not there yet, but we're still working with the group. So you can see that the wavelet we like is really not the symmetric wavelet. It's really, again, it's try to see the peak. And we already knew that by looking at our data. So the probability for that process to complete is the highest when you have a peak and come down. And this is also coincided with what this wavelet is indicating to us. So here what I see is that we didn't really follow this curve. We both want that, right? We increased predictive accuracy and also increased predictability, interpretability. So coming back to data science cycle, right? You have to go through a process to really make your model trustworthy before you interpret it. And for the last some minutes, let me just, how much time do I have? 8 minutes or something? How many minutes? 10? Okay, thank you. So we define vertical science with a paper with my former student, Carl Kumbier, as extracting reliable, reproducible information from data with an enriched technical language to communicate and evaluate empirical evidence in the context of human decision domain knowledge. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of kind of situate our work, I mean, at least eventually, into this context of human decision domain knowledge. Instead of, well, we interpret it and then it's done. For a paper, you might say that's enough, but hopefully you'll continue to really see the downstream impact of your interpretation. Otherwise, we won't have the impact we should have. So the PCS framework is a very general framework based on 3 principles: data science, really try to marry principles of statistics, machine learning, and expand on stability from statistics, sample to sample variability, to control theory, and also stability in control theory and numerical analysis to this more big umbrella of stability. And it also includes linguistic stability. There was an early interesting discussion. I think one of the speakers this morning was talking about multi-view. And there was, I think the organizer was saying that in medical domain, multi-view means multimodality. So you can see right there that the same word, when we have multidisciplinary people, it means different things. So the stability is such a common sense principle. It's not just at the modeling stage, but also at the linguistic stage, I would call linguistic stability. So PCS really unifies, streamlines, expands ideas and best practices for both machine learning and statistics and for the full data science lifecycle. And I start pursuing this general principle of stability, which I think you can see many ideas I will put in the earlier talks under the stability when you look at, try to warp the data and try to do this CCA to, have data augmentation, all of that, I will put the big umbrella. The reason I like putting under a first principle is because then they become comparable and it's easier to borrow ideas when you think they're related and they're not related. So in a 2013 paper I wrote, at the time, there were a lot of works on irreproducibility of scientific discoveries. So it's really in the flurry of works that inspire me to work on this reproducibility related work, which is saying that you want your results at the modeling stage to be stable relative to data perturbation, whatever you define that, and also for algorithm perturbation, right? So as I said, we have all the people here have probably their favorite interpretation methods. But if I'm a patient, I will be worried that if the interpretations from different reputable groups give very good explanation why I got a certain treatment. I would like the different methods to have some stability analysis to see that why they should be trusted or which part of the different interpretation methods should be trusted. So there's every stage of the way we have so many human judgment calls that we need to have a community discussion to see which one to trust or only trust the part we agree with. And if you want to be highbrow, I can quote Plato, who said that for true opinions, as long as they remain a fine thing, all do is good, but they're not willing to remain long and escape from a man's mind, so they're not worth much until one ties them down, right? So this ties them down for me means stability. And I can say that scientists are already doing PCS analysis, right? So if you look at this plot from climate scientists at the 1990, they try to predict the global temperature rise 100 years from then. You don't have one curve. You have 9 different models, kind of related on the same data, but with different processing, with different combination with modeling. And this is better than just one model because give us an interval from 1.5 to 5.5, right? So I think there are a lot of evidence saying that probably cannot retain 1.5, but it really tells you some sense of variability. At least this is model variability. So this is all kind of kosher under the PCS framework. And let's go back to the wavelets, adaptive wavelets. We did 5 randomized initialization for this problem to fit the LSTM. And you get something quite similar, right? So you want to make sure that I'm not just picking something just happen with one run. So this is at least minimum you can do. You can also delete 30% of your data. We did that, right? 20%, we delete 20% data. You get very similar, right? So these are 2 things. If you don't want to worry about linguistic stability or something upstream, and there's a big elephant in the room is actually data cleaning, which I'm now addressing. I have a separate talk to say that we really have to worry about data cleaning, especially for medical data. There's lots of missing values. For one particular data we did in my class, you can see that the data cleaning variability is the same magnitude as you bootstrap the data for one cleaned version. So it's not trivial. It's the same magnitude. So if we only report on one clean data, then we're underestimating the uncertainty. And there's a paper just came out in PCG National Academy of Science. 73 teams of social science organized to work on the same data with the same hypothesis about immigration, get results all over the place, from very positive on the impact of immigration on public policy, from the very negative. So this is really accounted for uncertainty. And we recommend that you document everything as much as you can and put it on GitHub so other people can take a look. Model is mental construct. Reality is reality. You have to link them. Otherwise, they don't have to be connected. Even you apply the data to the model doesn't mean that your model captured the right structures. It could be completely artificial, the structure in the model, not about the data. So my group and others have been very successful to use these principles. There are a lot of detail you have to work out, right? What's the stability measure? What are the perturbations you want to use? So you document it. There's no like a panacea, but thinking along this direction have been really helpful for us. And the framework has been extended by others to network analysis, also spatial statistics, and also reinforcement learning. And we also use it to stress test for existing decision rules. Right. So this is really can be used for external validation. It doesn't replace external validation, but if you don't pass internal validation, you don't want to waste your money to do external validation. So this is like a conservative approach so that we save money. We have a lot of software on my website to make this stability analysis easy. You basically provide the perturbation. You do, if in the ID case, we can do it for you. And that's Python built on the ML flow and other software from the RISE lab at Berkeley. We also have an R package called SimSet to make simulation easy. So one thing is that if you do theoretical work, you can only do some structures, but you can do lots of simulations, which data inspire, which capture some reality. You cannot tell them apart, and you can make sure your method works on multiple simulated data. And we always should do documentation, just a template at my website. If you're interested, we have a template for you to start with. So to finish, novel scientific insights are very, very important, and we're able to get some from the contextual decomposition. We developed also later adaptive wavelet decomposition, and we haven't done that, but we'll be interested to know what type of deep learning, what type of problems these adaptive wavelets are well suited for. I don't believe anything will work all the time. So it's really find out what type of problems is a good fit. And I would love to connect the AWD with mechanistic models and PDE type of models, and can we generate mathematics that's through these adaptive wavelets. And while working on Hutchinson Cancer Center and other genome centers, try to build PCS ideas into different analysis protocols and pipelines. And as I speak, I'm trying to finish a book with my former postdoc, Butter, who's at Utah Medical School now. We'll have a free online copy, use these PCS frameworks to really do data analysis, cover a lot of gaps in the textbooks. That about the connection with reality, about data cleaning, the things not covered in any existing books. And it's really a good book to go with traditional mathematical type of books. Here is a list of papers, and thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much.